Good evening, dear gentlemen and dear ladies. I'm very happy to host again Mr. Aron Шарпантьер, who is an American prominent novelist. Good evening, Mr. Charpentier. Thank you very much for joining us at Media Inform channel.
Hello, Mr. Kациним. Thank you for having me again.
Mr. Charpentier, I'm following U.S. newspapers, U.S. magazines, and I noticed that still, despite the fact that next week there will be a month since the, let's say, Russian invasion began, still Ukraine is on all U.S. outlets, and people pay serious attention towards the president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky. What do you think? We don't know how long this conflict will, last. We know that Putin is really a crazy person, and Putin wants to invade Ukraine. And Ukrainian warriors, Ukrainian militaries, they fight Putin very effectively. Actually, Ukraine now is winning this war, but still Russia is a big country, even with nuclear weapon. We don't know how long it will take for Ukraine to, let's say, put a full stop in this conflict. What do you think? Is it possible for Ukraine to continue to keep, let's say, the level of discussion in Western media, including US media? Are US media tired of this conflict? And how can you assess communication which comes from Ukraine, from the government, etc., to Western Europe, to media? Can we say that now Ukraine still on the, let's say, on the top of US views?
Well, I think, first of all, President Zelensky is doing an excellent job at keeping Ukraine in the news and speaking to world organizations. I had my doubts about him before. I wasn't a Zelensky supporter before, I have to be honest with you. But now, I think he's a hero, and not just in Ukraine, but I think he's a hero throughout the world. And I guess I was kind of prejudiced against him because he was an entertainer before he was, before he became a politician. But now that I see what a great job he's doing, and he's a really great speaker. A lot of people are comparing him to Churchill, to Winston Churchill, even. So I think, with an effective leader like Zelensky, I believe it's possible. And he's a fighter. And I don't think that he's like the Ukrainian people. I don't think that Zelensky's going to slow down. I think that he's just going to keep fighting, and he's going to do what he can to keep Ukraine in the news. And I think that the people will. I think that the war is starting to affect Americans, right? Gas is going up. Food prices are going up. I mean, everything's going up. And so, and the potential of the war in, Ukraine escalating into other countries, possibly even NATO countries, will definitely keep, the Russian invasion in the news, and in people's minds. But it'll have to be a continuous fight to do that, and I think that it's not only a military fight, right? It's you have to be relentless in the media too, and as I mentioned in the last interview, we're in a new age, right? We're in the information age. And as long as, so, you know, we're fighting two wars, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, you know, some of Putin's propaganda has been a little effective here and there, you know, in America and other parts of the world. But, you know, I think I just don't know what kind of people could possibly believe that misinformation, but it, you know, people are believing it. But I think that I think most educated people, I think all educated people, I think most you know, quote unquote ordinary people. I consider myself an ordinary person. You know, don't believe the Russian propaganda. And I think that as long as you know, babies are dying and it's being filmed in the news, I think that you know, it's very sad to see in the news, and I think that it's very difficult for people to just brush that aside. And I think if we keep that in the news, then I don't think that people will, you know, that Ukraine will be out of the news anytime soon. But I have noticed on the news that they are starting to show all the news now. Whereas before it was just, they were constantly showing news about Ukraine. So again, I think we really need to be relentless to really, and that's why I decided to do interviews like this. You know, I don't think it'll make a huge difference. You know, I'm not a world famous person or anything. But, you know, I think every bit counts. And I think that, you know, even ordinary people can make contributions in some small way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charpentier. Obviously, you know, many people passed away during this war. Many people were killed during this war. And according to UN official statistics, about 1,000 people died. I mean, civilians died in this war. And we understand that this statistics is not, is not real statistics. You know, people who died during this war, the quantity of, you know, number of people much higher than 1,000 people. What do you think, how Ukraine will change after this war? You know, I had a very nice conversation yesterday with one of Israeli historians. I actually asked him the following question. In case Ukraine wins the war against Russia, and, you know, we understand that Ukraine is only one country among former Soviet Union states which can actually win the war against Russia. Should it be, let's say, a new chapter in the life of Ukraine when Ukraine will become stronger, more sophisticated, and will attract the rest of former Soviet Union countries, which before were very, linked to Russia? Like it used to be with Prussia and Austria. You probably remember that in the 19th century, Prussia and Austria, they challenged each other to, for the domination in Germany. And when Prussia won the war against Austria, then Germany were united, around Prussia. So can we say that if Ukraine, gets a victory, then it means that Ukraine will become a very strong let's say, powerful center which will attract, the rest states in the region,
I can't predict that, but I do know that people, including myself, I think that they highly respect Ukrainians for being so brave and so patriotic. And I have to admit, I'm inspired from time to time, and I'm proud because I lived in Ukraine for some time, and it's become kind of part of my culture too. But can Ukraine inspire the rest of the world if it wins the war? I first of all, I believe that there is a good chance that Ukraine could win the war, and I think if Ukraine did, then I think Ukraine would definitely inspire the world. Ukrainians are already inspiring people in their everyday lives, but that's a very difficult question. It's really hard to see how things will turn out in the end. I mean, and I think it's going to be a long fight. I think that Putin's not going to give in so easily, and I don't think the Ukrainian people are going to give in. And I think that even if he does take over, go ahead,
Mr. Charpentier. You know that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, prominent U.S. professor, Mr. Francis Fukuyama, he published an article, An End of History, where he stipulated that after the fall of Iron Curtain, actually, and when all democracies were installed in the Eastern Europe, then basically the history stopped, because everywhere democracy, let's say, they, started to grow, So democracies won. And now we see that, dictatorship, especially in Russia, they rose their heads. And we see that now, the fight between Ukraine and Russia is not only the fight between the Ukraine and Russia, it's also a fight between democracy and dictatorship. And a democratic way of life with a dictatorship way of life. So you now see how people in Ukraine behave, and you see that even having guns and, machine guns, ordinary Ukrainians, they behave with very good confidence, and, very determined, So it seems to me that this war illustrates that democracies in the long run, they are more flexible and more effective than dictatorships. What do you think about this?
Well, you mentioned this topic in the last interview. Question. I mean, you'd mentioned the book and the author, but your question's somewhat different. My answer will be somewhat different. Well, that's
Mr. Charpentier. Now there is a strong debate about the new organization in Europe, which will come maybe instead of NATO. So this idea stipulated by Ukrainian President Zelensky, organization has to be more effective than NATO, because we see that NATO, despite the fact that NATO treaty stipulates that according to Article 5, in case some state faces, let's say, a war, then other states will come and help the state, But it seems that NATO has to be, let's say, reloaded, has to be, improved. And the president of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky, he offers another system of organization of security in Europe. What do you think about NATO? Does NATO have a future, or we have to find a new organization. We have to find a new organization, launch a new organization, which will be more effective than NATO, because we see that NATO, maybe because there are 30 states there, adopt decisions very slowly, and it can't provide a quick response to the dangers which Europe faces.
I think that something new could develop, or at least NATO could become more flexible, because I think it depends on the outcome of this war. I think that, for instance, the UN was created after World War II, right? So I think that you would have to have a major war for there really to be, major change in a world organization, or for a new organization to emerge. Again, I just think it's really too early to tell. We don't know how long this war will go on, and we'll just have to wait and see. But I think President Zelensky is a very intelligent man. I think he's really determined. I think he has a lot of good ideas, and the world is listening to him, and he's inspiring the world, and not just not just ordinary people, but he's also inspiring a lot of leaders, a lot of politicians throughout the world. And it's, again, I think Ukraine in general is really inspiring the world. It's kind of hard to see that on your end in the middle of a war. But again, he's inspired me. And for me to have the doubts that I had before, and to really see a different leader, the Ukraine, the Zelensky, emerge the way that he did, to be as strong as he's been, to be loyal to his people. He could have easily left Ukraine, right, and gone to another country. He could have easily handed Ukraine over to Putin. So I think people highly respect him because he's a fighter. And I think Americans, and I think not just Americans, but a lot of countries throughout the world appreciate President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people for, number one, being extremely loyal, for fighting, because Americans highly appreciate strength, and loyalty is extremely important, and patriotism. I think that Americans could learn a good lesson from Ukrainian patriotism, and I think the world is learning a lot from Ukraine these days, and I truly mean that.
Mr. Charpentier, is we heading towards the Third World War? What do you think?
I think anything's possible. I think during the time, I think before World War I began, I don't think anyone thought that there would ever be a World War I, right? And I don't think anyone ever thought that there would be a World War II, right? It's just unimaginable to think that the world will be at war. It's just something that is beyond anyone's imagination. I mean, I never thought that Ukraine would be attacked by Russia the way it has. And I never thought that we would have excuse me, I have a cold. I never thought that there would be a world pandemic the way there was, right? And so you never know. And I you know, if Putin attacks a NATO country, then eventually America and, you know, our NATO allies will definitely have to intervene. Because if we don't, then where does it all end, right? So there has to be a fine line. And, you know, during World War II, it took a lot of countries to, excuse me, took a lot of countries time before they intervened, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, they were afraid of what Hitler might do. Excuse me. So I wouldn't say that Putin is exactly the same as a Hitler, but I think that he has that same authoritarian mentality, and he is committing atrocities, and he is a megalomaniac. So he's acting irrationally. So I think anything is possible.
Mr. Charpentier, you probably heard that now many Russian billionaires who, you know, obtained residence permit around Europe, in Britain, they now been sanctioned, and they, you know, they don't have an access to their money, you know. Well, this is a good decision, and I, you know, truly support this decision by the Westerns. I think that at the end of the day, these people, they will put pressure on Putin to stop the war. So this is a logical decision. But, you know, these people, billionaires, Russian billionaires who, you know, reside in Europe. They are residing in Europe, in Britain for the last 20 years. And they were in Europe when Putin annexed Crimea, when Putin started the war against Ukraine. And, you know, they felt very comfortable in Europe and in Britain. And maybe, you know, Europe and Britain now tries to pretend that, you know, they're doing their best to help Ukraine. But, you know, memory of the person is built in the way that he doesn't remember what was before, you know. But during these 20 years, there were many signs that Putin is building a dictatorship, which at the end of the day will cause serious troubles for the rest of countries, you know, and for its neighbors, for Russian neighbors. But, you know, British and European governments, they did not impose sanctions against Russian billionaires, against Russia rich people. Moreover, Europeans, they, you know, they were very happy to see Russian billionaires because they spent a fortune in Europe and Britain, and they invested a fortune. So what do you think? Should we expect any kind of apologies, or at least Europe and Britain to reassess their behavior during the last 20 years so we can feel confident that such situation won't happen in the future?
I think that we have to just move forward, you know, from and just, you know, make judgments from, you know, from the time the war began until, you know, and moving forward, because, you know, I don't think Britain or any country for that matter, and again, I can't speak for the British, I can't speak for Britain, I'm American. You know, I don't even know that I can completely speak for my country. I'm not, you know, I'm not a politician, for instance, but I do think as an American anyway, I think that, I just think that no one could have, seen all this coming, and I think putting sanctions on Russia, and I think that going after a lot of these oligarchs will be effective in the long run, and it's already showing its strains on the Russian economy. And I remember, excuse me, I remember talking to someone one time, and they told me that the thing that hurts rich people the most, and the thing that they fear the most, is losing their wealth. So I think this is, and if you even look at the reactions in a lot of, if you can see the oligarchs' faces, even in some of the videos or some pictures these days when they're with Putin, they don't look very happy. And a lot of these oligarchs definitely helped Putin in a lot of ways, right? And they're definitely not going to be very supportive in the future, right? So yeah, again, I just think that we have to move forward and keep trying to, rely on Russia, less and less financially, and just keep putting sanctions on Russia. I think it does work. I think it is working.
Mr. Charpentier, thank you very much for this interview. Thank you very much for your, attitude towards Ukraine. I appreciate that you always find time to have this fruitful dialogue. And I hope that, next week we will also have an interview, because now this is a very hot situation in Ukraine because of Russian invasion. And I think it's important to continue this dialogue, which might be useful not only for Ukrainian audience, but also for American audience, because at the end of the day, as Thomas Friedman used to say, the world is a flat. So it means that Ukraine and the United States are only, different rooms inside the one flat. So we have to continue this dialogue. Thank you very much. Arron Shharpantier, prominent American author and my great friend from the United States. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks again for having me.